Welcome to American Battlefield Trust's 160th anniversary of the Overland campaign video coverage. My name is Sarah K. Byerly, I work in the Education Department, and I'm standing on the battlefield at Harrison Farm, or the site of Harrison Farm. Some ruins of the house, not much of it left behind me here on a rise out in part of the land that Confederate troops move over as they're heading toward the Muleshoe Salient during the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House. And just to give you a little overview, I would go back and watch our detailed videos about these topics that I'm going to hit just at a really high level, but just to kind of bring things in as we'll be wrapping up the fighting here at Spotsylvania Court House. The Army's come down into this area. Fighting begins on May 8th around Laurel Hill. On May 9th and 10th, it's going to continue in that area with Confederate lines stretching out, more Union troops coming into the area. There's a probe toward the Confederate left flank at Poe River. And then on May 10th, Emory Upton is going to make a punching attack into the Union line. He will break through, but he's unsupported. Another large-scale attack is going to happen on May 12th as Union troops attack what's known as the Muleshoe Salient, a protruding point in their line of fortifications. They are going to break through as well, but they're not able to spread out. More and more troops are sent into the area, and the Confederates begin to counterattack into the Muleshoe area, leading to massive casualties, intense hand-to-hand fighting that the Battle of Spotsylvania Court House is often known for. But that fighting, May 12th, shifting over into May 13th, that's not the ending of the fight here around Spotsylvania Court House. In fact, the fighting is going to continue for almost another week. And to talk more about those details, Chris Mikowski and Dan Davis will be joining us.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Just a pleasure to be with us. Like this, share this, subscribe. Make sure your friends know what's going on here at the American Battlefield Trust for the Overland 160th. Just to orient us a little bit, I'm going to ask Chris White, who's behind the camera, to kind of pan off in this direction. So the west face of the Muleshoe is going to be off to my right. Confederate counterattacks sweeping off in that direction, trying to close off that breakthrough. The tip of the Muleshoe would be off in this direction, a little bit behind me. If we were to walk here from the Harrison house along the walking path, it would take us to the Neil McCool home where we started our previous video, so you can visit that yourself. And then the east face of the Muleshoe is going to be off in that direction. So Sarah talked about that fighting that's here on the 12th and 13th. There's also some fighting off to my right, about a half a mile at a place called Heath's Salient. In the afternoon of May 12th, Ambrose Burnside is going to launch some attacks against Lee's line, even as Lee tries to launch some attacks against Burnside's line, neither commander knowing that the other is attacking. The objective for both is to alleviate pressure at the Muleshoe, hoping to kind of shift some troops away from that. But because of the simultaneous nature of that fighting, it doesn't achieve that objective for either commander, and that fighting will take place over in that direction in the afternoon of the 12th of May. On the 14th of May, after things here quiet down, Lee pulls back into a line that's behind this camera. If we pan around in this direction, Lee's last line is in the woods behind us here. Survivors from Edward Allegheny Johnson's division, hammered hard by Winfield Scott Hancock's 2nd Corps, fell back, and they're going to create this last line. It's going to be formidable because for 5 days, they're going to be able to just dig in, fortify, rest, reinforce, get some artillery into position there. That's going to come into play in just a couple days on May 18th. But on the 14th, as these lines continue to shift and reconfigure, what Grant is going to do is take his 2nd Corps and his 6th Corps from this side of the battlefield, and his 5th Corps from this side of the battlefield, and shift them over to the east side of the battlefield. And so leading the way will be Gouverneur K. Warren's 5th Corps and the 6th Corps under Horatio Wright. They're supposed to launch a massive 2-corps attack on the morning of the 14th against Lee's right flank off in that direction. They're going to end up not being able to get into position in time because it's raining, it's dark, roads are muddy, streams are flooded, nobody knows the way. And so just small forces will arrive there on the morning of the 14th. As the day continues, they will launch an attack against a position known as Myers Hill. They're going to drive Confederates off of that. Confederates are going to get their dander up. They're going to have a counterattack and drive the Federals off of Myers Hill. George Gordon Meade, commander of the Army of the Potomac, almost gets captured as part of that event. So, of course, then his dander gets up. And we all know George Gordon Meade does not have a calm, cool composure. So he's going to send portions of half of his army to recapture that hill, even as Jubal Early, commander of the Confederate Third Corps, pulls off. And so Federals will then capture that position by the end of the day on the 14th. That land has been preserved by our partners at the Central Virginia Battlefield Trust. Important part of the battlefield, non-contiguous with the Park Service owns, so it's been an underlooked story. So having some of these preservation opportunities around the edges of Spotsylvania has been super important in helping tell that fuller story of what goes on here. It's going to keep raining on the 14th and the 15th, so it's going to make it hard for Grant to maneuver. He's used to quick, fast lightning strikes from those armies he commanded out west. But the Army of the Potomac, as you have learned over the course of watching these videos, is giant, it's slow, it's gaumy, it doesn't move with that fast alacrity that Grant expects. So he's not able to move across this battlefield with the speed that he hopes for. By the 18th, the rain has stopped, and he looks for an opportunity here against this position of Lee's line. He has drawn Lee in that direction. Lee has taken troops from his left flank and shifted them to extend his line to the right. And Grant figures, well, Lee keeps being strong wherever we try to poke against him. He's got to be weak somewhere. Let's try his left flank. So he's going to launch an attack against this position on the morning of the 18th. To do that, he's going to shift his 2nd and 6th Corps from the far side of the battlefield back over here to attack across the very same ground that the 2nd Corps had attacked across on the 12th of May. Now, as we mentioned in a previous video, those casualties from that battlefield had been buried in shallow graves that had washed up because of the rain over the previous few days. So as Hancock's men get into position, they're really going across this landscape that is absolutely dreadful in not only appearance, but smell, because the heat and the rain has caused these bodies to begin to deteriorate. It's dreadful. So just imagine this horrific landscape that these guys have to cross. The 6th Corps is supposed to be the right flank of this attack, and then the 2nd Corps is supposed to be the center, and then Ambrose Burnside is again supposed to attack off in that direction. But the 6th Corps, because of the rain and the muddy roads, they don't get into position in time. So the 2nd Corps will be ready, and only a single division, Thomas Neal's division of the 6th Corps, will be in position, but David Russell is missing. Ricketts, James Ricketts, he's missing. And so when 4 o'clock comes and the attack is supposed to launch, Hancock and Wright don't launch their attack because they're waiting for those missing divisions. Burnside launches at 4 o'clock. Again, one of the crazy stories here at Spotsylvania is Burnside happens to be on time for everything he's asked to do, which was not the case in the wilderness. I always describe Burnside as being spectacularly mediocre. He actually hits his marks here at Spotsy. So he's going to attack on time, off in that direction to my left, but because he's not attacking simultaneously here, Confederates are able to hold him off there. Finally, close to about 4:25, Hancock and the single division from Wright are going to come down from behind me in this direction. They're only going to get about as far as that little ridge line that you can see behind me. The Park Road goes on the far side of that. John Brown Gordon, the lawyer from Georgia, his division in the 3rd Corps, in the 2nd Corps, had dug some reserve lines through there, starting when they first arrived late on the 8th. And the Federals are going to advance that far and then have to reverse those works, but they can't get any closer. The line that Lee has built as his last line is so strong and it's so well fortified by artillery that we have an excellent example of engineering over infantry. And so even though this attack on the 18th is every bit as large as the attack on the 12th, they can't even get within rifle range because the artillery from the Confederates is so strong and it pins the Federals down behind those reserves. This is going to last for only 3 hours, as opposed to the fighting on the 12th, which lasted for 22. And Grant realizes this is not going to work. Burnside sends word, this is not going to work. And so Grant's going to come up with plans to pull out of Spotsylvania after all. And to talk a little bit more about that, I'm going to bring on my good friend, Dan Davis.
Thanks, Chris. Hello there, everyone. As Chris mentioned, Grant is going to begin making plans to pull out of Spotsylvania Court House. Remember, he had told Abraham Lincoln that there will be no turning back. During this battle on May 11th, he's going to send a telegram back to the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, telling him that he is prepared to fight it out on this line if it takes all summer. And that is exactly what Grant intends to do. Going back to our earlier videos, Grant will never give up. He will never relent. He will keep the pressure on Robert E. Lee no matter what happens. And he's going to begin doing this on May 20th and into the 21st. But before he can, interestingly enough, Lee's actually going to come out from behind his entrenchments. The Federals have pulled away from this area, and he's going to send Richard Ewell swinging off to the north and east on May 19th in a reconnaissance in force to try to figure out what Grant is doing. And there's going to be a fight, a very sharp engagement that erupts in what is known as the Battle of Harris Farm. You can still go there today, visit a monument that's been preserved by our friends at the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust. Unfortunately, however, Harris Farm is one of those lost battlefields. Much of it has been developed. Just going back to how important it is, preservation is, especially here in Spotsylvania, as we continue to piece together this battle that's spread out for several miles. This reconnaissance in force led by Ewell is actually going to come very close to severing Grant's supply line that runs back to Fredericksburg, the Fredericksburg Road, or modern 208. But Grant has reinforcements in the form of heavy artillery units, heavy artillerists that have been in the defenses of Washington. They've been cannibalized into infantry. They are now carrying muskets. They're going to come down, join the Army of the Potomac, and help replenish some of the losses that Grant has sustained here at Spotsylvania and at the Wilderness. And we're going to talk more about them in another video at Cold Harbor in great detail. But despite the near success of the engagement, Robert E. Lee is starting to lose confidence in Richard Ewell. Richard Ewell is going to lose men that Lee cannot quickly replace during the reconnaissance, and combined with his actions we talked about in another video on the morning of May 12th during the fighting at the Muleshoe salient, that confidence that Lee has in Ewell is going to begin to dwindle to the point where Ewell will not be in command by the end of this campaign. But on the 20th and 21st, Grant is going to decide to put a worm out on a hook, if you will, in the form of Winfield Scott Hancock's Second Corps. Grant is trying to entice Lee to come out from behind his entrenchments again so that he can catch Lee in the open, catch him in the open field like he has been wanting to do since the campaign started. Hancock is going to make a march off to the south and east toward the area around Bowling Green and Milford Station. You may be familiar with it, but Lee's not going to take the bait. He is going to begin pulling out of these earthworks and heading south toward the North Anna, which is going to be Grant's next objective that we're going to talk about in another video. And to talk a little bit more about Grant's movement and Lee's movement to the North Anna River, I'm going to bring on my colleague, Chris White.
Thanks, Dan. I'm going to bring on Chris Mikowski here, and we're going to wrap up this coverage of just Spotsylvania, and we're going to move on to the North Anna River. But in the meantime, as we move from Spotsylvania Courthouse down to the North Anna River, I encourage you to check out our Massaponax Church step-in video. That's where you can actually step into a historic photograph. Massaponax Church is a historic church just south of Fredericksburg, Virginia. It'll be the main headquarters for a few hours of George Gordon Meade and Ulysses S. Grant. And we'll have a series of pictures taken outside of this window and outside into the churchyard of the Union High Command actually at work. Gary Edelman and I will step into that photograph and tell you a little bit more about Massaponax as well as what's happening at that point of the war. So Chris, what we're starting to do with Ulysses S. Grant is shift from one side of the Spotsylvania battlefield over to the other. We're going to move down Route 208, try to get into Spotsylvania Courthouse. Doesn't work. Now we're going to keep shifting a little bit farther to the south to a place called Guinea Station, and then down towards Milford Station and other places. So we're moving away from the battlefield here, and as we do so, Grant is maintaining the momentum. So what's the outcome here at Spotsylvania Courthouse for U.S. Grant in your eyes?
Big thing is he's just got to learn how to use this army. He's really been expecting this army to perform the way his armies have moved out west with quick lightning speed. This is a big, slow army. It's political. It's not responsive. It is willing to fight, which surprises him a little bit. but the commanders themselves are much more cautious. They're risk averse, and he's really got to kind of overcome the culture of this army to use this army to its best advantage. So I think that's Grant's biggest takeaway from here. He's willing to try lots of different things: frontal assaults, innovation, maneuver. He's got it all going on, but he still hasn't found quite the right combination to find that success he's looking for.
Yeah, and technically he's still in charge of all the Union armies, but he's really taking a harder and harder approach to the Army of the Potomac. He's turning George Gordon Meade into a high-ranking staff officer or chief of staff. So that's something he's adjusting to. I think when you do the flip side of the coin with Robert E. Lee, Lee is being bled out here. His high command is starting to fall apart. Started in the Wilderness. We've lost James Longstreet there. Now here at Spotsylvania Court House in the midst of this campaign, you lose Jeb Stuart, who dies, mortally wounded at Yellow Tavern, dies the next day. Richard Ewell will be relieved of command, and then eventually we'll bring in Jubal Early to take over the 2nd Army Corps full-time. But Early was kind of that last ace he had up his sleeve. A.P. Hill has not done a heck of a lot of good since he took over the 3rd Corps in 1863, but there's really no one to replace him with, so he's kind of stuck with Hill. So you have Richard Herron Anderson, the 1st Corps commander, who this is his first battle as a Corps commander. Then you have Richard Ewell heading out the door, and then you have A.P. Hill, who is unreliable at best. He's either sick, or he may not make reconnaissance, or he might just do a boneheaded thing and charge across the field. You never know what he's going to be up to. So Lee is now starting, the wheels are starting to come off for that Army Northern Virginia. As Dan pointed out, we have more reinforcements coming in from Washington for the Union Army of the Potomac. We're not talking quality, we're talking quantity. And then from the south, Lee will start to receive more reinforcements, and in our next video we'll get into that as we get closer to the North Anna River, and we'll really dissect those. But for as much as a tactical draw as this is here at Spotsylvania Court House, I think it's a strategic Union victory, and it's a tactical Confederate victory. So on the tactical level, in the mud and blood and the low end of the warfare, Lee's able to stop Grant's army, at least for a time, slow them down. He's able to inflict casualties. But on the grander strategic level, Grant is able to keep Lee in place. Lee cannot escape from here. He can't go on the offensive. He is holding him, as I keep saying, while other armies for the Union start landing body blows on the Confederacy. And then, when they do leave here, Lee is still playing to Ulysses S. Grant's tune. He has to chase down Grant, and the next place will be down at the North Anna River. So I think after 30,000 more casualties, Grant is yet another step closer to Richmond and Petersburg, as well as bleeding the Confederate Army white here in the east.
Yeah, if we look at those numbers, when Hancock attacks on the 18th, he's got 8,000 new men on the field. They've got reinforcements coming down from Washington beginning on the 17th that just get incorporated into this army. Think about those numbers. Grant starts with 120,000 at the beginning of this campaign. By the time he gets to the North Anna, he will have lost half of his army and being reinforced up to 68,000 men, which is still a staggering number of losses. And he still literally has men marching down the road. The best Lee has is news that Breckinridge just won out at Newmarket, and hey, can I get those troops?
Yeah.
And so, Lee starts with 66,000 guys. He gets here with 55. By the time he suffers all of his losses here and gets to North Anna and gets Breckinridge's reinforcements, Pickett, some others, he's up to 54. So he also suffers huge losses. Now, when we get to North Anna, 68 versus 54, it's numerically as close as those armies will ever be. But as Chris points out, Grant can just keep plugging more men in. Lee can't. And that's going to be a huge, huge, huge problem as this campaign continues.
Yeah, and in the end, I also think that, I've said this in another video, you cannot believe Lee's returns. I think the Confederate casualties were much higher than they actually were in the Wilderness and here at Spotsylvania Court House. In 1862, he said it himself to all of his men, do not play up how many losses you have. That doesn't make your unit better than anyone else or more honorable, and it also looks worse in the eyes of the War Department. So I do think there is some underreporting going on there. Not to mention the attrition within these two armies. We're talking about regiments who marched off with colonels into the Wilderness are now being led by captains. So the people who are keeping the roles may not be here anymore. And even if they did, they may have been lost in the fires of Richmond in 1865 or other things. So those are things other items to keep in mind as we move on from Spotsylvania to the next step. So what we've had so far, Wilderness, technically a Confederate victory. They will move down here because Grant gave up the field. This will be another place where it'll technically be a Confederate victory because he gives up the field. That's 19th century ideals. You keep the field, you won the battle. Doesn't matter how much you bled out on this field, but you win. But it's Grant keeping that momentum. It's keeping Lee in one place, and it's keeping him pinned down. I think that's key.
And Grant's closer to the Confederate capital every single day as he continues to move. So maybe he gives up the field, but he gets ground as he does so. The other thing I just want us to think about, particularly as this campaign continues, one of Robert E. Lee's superpowers is that he can anticipate what the enemy is up to. He can read his opponent's mind, which he's been extremely successful with up to this point in the war. And he does not have Grant figured out at all. And he continues to misjudge Grant. In the Wilderness, here at Spotsy, that's going to play out as we get to North Anna. So keep an eye on that, because one of Lee's best superpowers fails him.
And I think it's a two-way street. Grant doesn't exactly understand Lee either. I think, it's the best of the best taking on each other. And, a lot of people like to poo-poo Grant, but Grant can do it all. So can Robert E. Lee. He can do almost anything, we'll say. He didn't win the war, so he can't do everything. But that's something that we need to keep in mind. You were putting the two best in the same place, and we're seeing that start to play out here, and that's this attritional warfare. And finally, again, keep in mind, Chris mentioned David Hunter's forces being defeated out in the valley at a place called Newmarket. Down along the peninsula, or down along Bermuda 100, Ben Butler, the Beast Butler, will be bottled up by Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard and George Pickett. Then we will start to see the Red River campaign fail out there with Nathaniel Banks. But William T. Sherman's armies are marching their way towards Atlanta because Joe Johnston, using his Fabian tactics, is going to give up chunks and chunks and chunks of Georgia until in July he is finally relieved of command by Jefferson Davis, and John Bell Hood steps into that vacuum. So there are a lot of different things happening right now on the grander strategic scale. And one last thing. November keeps getting closer, and that's the presidential election. If the Confederates can keep their armies in the field, keep inflicting casualties, making this so bloody that the Northern voters will come out and say, we don't want Lincoln anymore, that could potentially be a victory. But the closer Grant gets to Richmond, the closer he gets to Petersburg, and the more they take out the inner workings of the South, that will become a fool's errand for the Confederates by the late summer, early autumn of 1864.
We've got lots more coming up in our coverage of the 160th anniversary of the Overland campaign. Stay with us. If you haven't had a chance to watch our videos through the Wilderness or up through Spotsy, here's your chance to catch up. Make sure that you share those videos, like them, subscribe them, and we've got more coming up from here as we head down to the North Anna River and Cold Harbor.
And thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting battlefield education and preservation.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. To stay up to date on all the latest and coolest videos, please subscribe to the Trust YouTube channel. Preserve, educate, inspire.